Please forgive my meanness. Okay. Chairman to the front. And if you look at the wall, it's become crowded. Therefore, make your comments extremely brief. Y'all all through? Mr. Yates.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen of the committee. I have House Bill 166, and it has been passed in prior years. Last year, I believe, and they had a part in there that the governor didn't like, and he vetoed it, and that part is not in there anymore. I want to say for the record that even though I lived a dangerous life back in World War II, I'm not dangerously inclined enough to ride a motorcycle, so this is not for me. But a bunch of motorcycle people came to me, and I'm a sucker for helping people, and asked me to introduce this bill. It has two parts to it, and the it's A and B down here. Mainly that any motorcycle carrying a passenger other than a sidecar or enclosed car shall be equipped with footrests for each passenger. I don't know why they need that. I thought that'd be common sense, but anyway, that's needed now, they say. And B is no person shall operate a motorcycle with handlebars more than 25 inches in height above the portion of the seat occupied by the operator, with a backrest more commonly known as a sissy bar that is designed such a way to create a sharp point at the apex. And that's pretty well what it does. And the motorcycle folks all are for this, and nobody I found is against it. And I'd ask for favorable consideration.
You know, Mr. Yates, my mama told me one time when I was thinking about buying a motorcycle that she didn't understand anybody that wanted to get on something that run 120 miles an hour and then you prop it up on a kickstand.
I was only on one time, and I promised the Lord if He'd let me off safely, I'd never test Him again.
I'm trying to do better on that too. Ms. Cooper.
Mr. Chairman, please don't discourage people too much for adults riding motorcycles. They're our biggest area where we get organ donors.
And yes, they still want to ride them without a helmet. Unbelievable. Please, thank you, Mr. Yates.
Yeah, thank you. Please don't shoot the messenger here.
Mr. Welch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, I have two bills for you. On page one is HB 381, and this is the antithesis to a good cup of joe. This is a comprehensive revision to our notary laws. It's 26 pages. It's commendable for a good night's sleep. House Resolution 502 is on page 2, and this is a resolution that will authorize it's a constitutional amendment that would authorize the General Assembly to dedicate fees and taxes for particular purposes.
since I had to do his bill yesterday afternoon, I can tell you that that's 26 of the longest pages you'll ever want to read. Sleep is not the correct word. Coma is the correct word. No questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now my seatmate, and I've already been threatened if I didn't put all her stuff on the floor, so she won't vote for me.
That's exactly.
Ms. Houston.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The first bill I bring to you is House Bill 763, and you will find that on
Third page, second structure.
okay. Does everybody find it? All right. This is known as the food bank bill, and this is to take the sales tax and use tax off of bulk food that's purchased by food banks, and also to exempt the sales and use tax off of food that's donated. And as a result of all this donated food, the state is able to pull down, by using the food bank as a third-party maintenance effort, we're able to pull down $23 million of TANF money. That's, any
Nope.
questions?
No questions.
Thank you. The next bill I bring to you is House Resolution 979. It's on the first page. It's a study committee program. Study committee, and this study committee is to study the places in state government that we have reading to the blind. We found there's some money in Public Service Commission, and there's also about 8 other places in the different agencies scattered out that read to the blind. We want to see if these are effective and how much money they're using, and see if we can modernize the way we read to the blind. Any questions? The next bill I have is known as Georgia Dream, and I'm sure you're all familiar with Georgia Dream. This is House Bill 773. Okay. It's on page 2 under modified structure. This is regarding the Georgia Housing and Finance Authority. This bill, Georgia Dream Bill, was heard in appropriations because it really has no financial impact on the state. These is to raise the bond limit from up to, I think it was the bond limit was 1.3 billion up to 3 billion. The federal government authorized, stand behind these bonds and guaranteed them. Georgia Dream has built 44,000 homes for people, financed 44,000 homes since 1976. This bond limit has not been raised since 1993, and the population of Georgia has almost doubled since 1993. And we have no financial obligation by this. It's just to put people in homes.
No questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Jaspers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Rules Committee. I bring House Bill 859. It's on the back of page 2, about very near the bottom. 859 is the campus safety bill. It will allow those who are 21 to carry a weapon that is concealed. It is prohibited in dormitories, fraternity houses, and sorority houses, and athletic sporting events. Mr. Chairman, that's what this bill does. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Ms. Hughley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To Mr. Jasper, I went to a HBCU, so explain to me what a fraternity house is like.
HBC, what would you say? HBC, you went where?
I went to a historically black college
Yes,
and
ma'am.
university. So our concept of a fraternity house may be a little bit different than what you have in mind in this bill. What is your concept of a fraternity house?
Those are fraternity and sorority houses that are authorized by the university or college that you went to. The others are social groups that are not authorized by the
So do
university.
people live in these places where you're talking about or not?
Yes, ma'am. I lived in one, yes, ma'am.
Okay. Well, then,
Yes. But also they may not live in them. There's both that goes on.
okay. Have you did any type of financial analysis in terms of how much this will cost our colleges and universities to implement this in terms of providing extra security and whatnot?
I have. It should cost nothing. As these are, as we said in the previous statement yesterday, these are folks who are over 21, good Georgians, have no criminal background, and there should be no additional cost in universities.
One other question, and that is, if the weapon cannot be in the dormitory, and if a student lives in a dormitory and they accidentally or forget to take their weapon into that dormitory, then what happens?
It's a misdemeanor. They should not have it there. They'd be violating the law.
And does campus security take care of that in terms of if there are any concerns?
Yes, ma'am. As they would now for someone who is a felon who has one on, that doesn't have a license, they would take care of it.
And one other question, and that is, why do you think students who are under 21 will be more secure when they cannot have these weapons, and students who are over 21 can have them?
Well, our current law allows those who are over 21 have their background checked to do this. It doesn't say anything about those that are under 21.
That's all, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
No more questions.
Thank you, committee. I look for your favorable consideration on this bill.
Mr. Chokus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I have two bills that I'd like, or one bill, one resolution. The first one is HB 965, which is at the top of page 2. HB 965 is a bill that will actually save lives. Few times can we come up here and actually say that we are saving lives. This bill will provide that no health benefit plan shall require an insured to fail to successfully respond to drugs or drugs for stage 4 advanced metastatic cancer prior to the approval of a drug prescribed by the insured's physician. And I'll be happy to answer any questions on that one, sir.
No question.
All right, on the second one, it's on page 3 at the bottom, HR 1052. And I made an error the last time I was here, and I'd like to have that recommitted to transportation.
The author wants to have that sent back to committee. Any opposed? It's back.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The committee, I'm here on House Bill 874, which is at the very bottom of page 2 under modified structure. This is my criminal street gang revision bill that I've worked on since this summer. Essentially, it does 3 things to tighten the Street Gang Act. Number 1, clarifies a few statutes where there is ambiguity or conflict in our law in the Gang Act. Number 2, it strengthens the sentencing range on certain gang activities for offenses such as threatening witnesses. And number 3, it takes a strong step in addressing the enormous issue our state and prisons are dealing with, in that gang members are obtaining cell phones and running gang operations, ordering hits, threatening witnesses from inside our prisons. And it also includes those who smuggle these devices in to the inmates.
No questions. Thank you. Mr. Hightower.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Page 3, 5th down, HB 916. This comes from a study committee that I chaired over the summer. What it aims to do is prevent certain state agencies from requiring recoupment from providers based on simple clerical errors. There was an example that we had over the summer with multiple examples where someone was given money from the state, and based on signatures being in the wrong place, the state was going after them for over $500,000 just for simple clerical errors. This bill will allow them in a clerical error situation to have 30 days to fix that error. If there is any indication of fraud, then that would not apply, and the state can go after them however they wish.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Raffensperger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Rules Committee. I bring before you today HB 790, which is on page 2 in modified structure rule. HB 790 would increase the penalties for swatting. Swatting is basically the term for a hoax 911 call. About 2 years ago, when I was still on council in Johns Creek, we had a hoax 911 call. And what happens is people disguise where they're calling from. They thought it was coming from a house in Country Club of the South. It was actually out of state. And the call of such a tremendous or scary nature that SWAT's called out. SWAT shows up and people are terrified and it's a hoax. This would increase the penalties. We actually did extend some grace for little Johnny. He didn't really understand the magnitude of what he may have done. It would be a high and aggravated misdemeanor. But a serial swatter, someone that has done this 2 or 3 times, would be facing additional jail time and additional fine. Thank you.
No questions. Thank you. Mr. Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 3, House Bill 980, just above the structured rule bold type, bring this back to you, and this essentially allows even-number year municipalities who are seeking elections in even-number years, allows them to qualify in August as they have traditionally done, but ups that up to 1 week. Instead of the last Monday in August, it's the 3rd Monday in August, because we're trying to avoid a long lame duck period, which is about 7 months before they actually are on the ballot in November. The current problem is they would have to qualify in March, and that's not good for governance. The other part of this bill is where if a person does not qualify for an open seat on city council, this allows a local governing authority to open that back up for 2 days, and so that qualification can occur instead of going through a special election process, which is expensive.
I don't see. There you are, Mr. Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is it not true that this bill has been asked for by the Georgia Municipal Association to
That is correct.
clear up some of their issues?
That is correct, and it does not involve or affect consolidated governments.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Peake.
Thank you, Mr. Yeah, just want to confirm your last statement. I was going to ask that the several communities that have consolidated governments across the state, who now have elections at primary dates as selected by their local governments, would not be affected at all. Is that correct?
That is correct. It does not affect them at all.
Thank you.
No more questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Efstration.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I bring before you House Bill 770, page 2, under modified structure. HB 770 makes the language in the human trafficking statute more specific and extends victim class to victims with developmental disabilities. It's requested by the Attorney General and the GBI. Would ask for your favorable consideration.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Bring before you HB 1030. It's on the front page, 3rd one down. This is dealing with the Georgia Seed Development Commission. This bill was brought to me by them. They're just looking to diversify the membership of that commission so that they can get better qualified members to serve on it that know about seeds and seed varieties and seed trends. And I appreciate your favorable consideration.
No questions. Thank you. Ms. Kendrick.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I am here to ask for your consideration of HB 6, which is the first bill on the 2nd page under modified structure rule. And this is my hope-related bill to allow the Georgia Student Finance Commission to award over a 4.0 towards the Zell Miller and Hope Scholarship for high school students that take advanced level STEM classes.
Ms. Kendrick, how many times have you been here?
This is my 4th time.
Okay, I've just held one person 5 times. You don't have to come back. We've got it in here. And if it's been, you can come back every day. But if you don't want to, you can take a vacation from the 9 o'clock meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Scott.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I have House Bill 913, and it is asking for a female Veterans Coordinator position for the Department of Veterans Affairs.
If you noticed your budget, it's in the budget. Any questions? No questions, thank you. Mr. Pizzo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. House Bill 93, second page, right smack dab in the middle. This bill addresses data obtained using automated license plate readers. Simply states that after 12 months, if you are not suspected of a crime, that your data shall be purged.
No questions, thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Quick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, I have two measures on the general calendar. One I've previously discussed with you, which is the fourth bill down on the modified open calendar, HB 405, and I'll again make the ask for that, and I'd be happy to stand for any questions that may have arisen since last I was here. But primarily I'm here to ask for HB 923 for your favorable consideration, which is in the structured section, the sixth bill down. This bill comes to the Jackson County delegation, Chairman Benton and myself, from the West Jackson Fire District, which actually operates as an independent governmental entity set up in 1965 by the General Assembly and part of a constitutional amendment process under our previous constitutional structure as a fire services district with an elected board. It's supported almost wholly by ad valorem taxes that are assessed for the district. So this is, as best we can tell, the only operational independent fire district that operates as a governing unit. The chief who presently is there came in 2007 and began attempting to get an exemption from the Department of Revenue, since they are a governing body acting independently just as the school district did, and he's been unable to do that. So we come now with the amendment to Title 48 to include this independent governing body in the same way that the counties, municipalities, and other independent districts have sales tax exemption, sales and use tax exemption. Mr. Chairman, that's the bill, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
No questions, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I bring forward House Bill 910. It's at the bottom of the first page. This basically just clarifies the code to where some folks have been overcharging for mental health records, and this will bring those mental health records into our current record charge that we have in the existing code.
What is that? Mr. Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have prices for what people can get charged for their health records all throughout the code, but is this the one that fixes the loophole for this one type of record?
Yes, sir. This fixes a loophole and misinterpretation of some agencies overcharging for these records, and it brings those records into our existing charge structure.
Okay, thank you.
No more questions, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Gravely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. On the third page, the last page, the first bill under structured rule, House Bill 216. This bill simply allows firefighters who have been diagnosed with cancer an opportunity to present medical evidence in a workman's comp claim.
No questions, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bring to you House Bill 768, middle of the third page, or actually the fourth bill under structured rule. House Bill 768 is also known as the ABLE bill. This is a bill that establishes a 529A account in the state of Georgia. Parallels the federal regulations most recently submitted by the federal government. It allows those disabled to save after-tax funds in a tax-exempt account, an account that is limited to $235,000. They have an annual asset limit of $14,000. Presently, they have an asset limit of $2,000. So this allows them to save money, actually have a job, maybe live in an apartment, maybe live independently. It does establish a board. The treasurer administers the account. The accounts can only be used for qualified items listed in the bill. Non-qualified will be taxed with a 10% penalty. If there are no questions, I have one other bill I want to speak to.
No question.
Okay, the other bill is 593, low voltage. It presently sits on the table. It's not on your list. I asked for it to be removed from the table and replaced on the calendar at a time seen fit by this committee.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Brockway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 2, sixth from the bottom, House Bill 792, bring it back before you again, does one very simple thing, allows people on college campuses to carry a electroshock weapon, also known as a taser or a stun gun.
No questions. Whoa. Ms. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question goes to an age limit. Is there an age limit here?
There's not, and the reason I did not include an age limit is because I couldn't find any age limit for carrying these devices anywhere else in code.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No more questions. Thank you.
Thanks.
Ms. Price.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I bring before you for the second time HB 897. It's on the very, very top of page 3. This bill, let's get the right one. This bill establishes a drug repository program to recycle unused medications that would otherwise go to waste. It also defines donating facilities, eligible recipients, and the end persons who would receive these drugs. It does not include controlled substances, and it has to be in tamper-evident packaging.
Any questions? No questions. Next.
May I also indulge you for a new bill on page 3 also, a second from the bottom, HB 939. This is a bill that piggybacks on HB 1000 from 2 years ago, and it modifies the bill that was introduced and passed for intercepting tax refunds to satisfy unpaid fines. And this bill cleans up the language of that previous bill. It also permits the Administrative Office of the Courts to transfer the intercepted tax refund amount to the court to where the debt is owed. And it also has that final court where the debt is owed will also notify the debtor at the end, and does not affect the rights of the debtor, and it's basically a cleanup of the previous bill.
No
I ask
questions.
for your favorable consideration.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Lumsden.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I bring to you House Bill 970, modified open, page 2, fourth item from the top. This is a bill that comes to us as a request from the Georgia Firefighter Standards and Training Council. The operation of the Standard and Training Council is governed by state law. That law requires that firefighters and support positions have to undergo a background check as part of their hiring process. Due to changes made at the federal level, the FBI will no longer perform background checks on support positions. The GBI is a state agency that processes requests for these background checks, and they have worked with the FBI and proposed language changes to Georgia law that will resolve the issue. House Bill 970 is the result of those conversations, and this will resolve the problem and permit us to continue to get background checks on support personnel.
No questions. Thank you. Ms. Gilligan.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I bring to you again HB 944. It's the second bill on the second page. As I mentioned yesterday, this bill allows the nurse practitioners, the registered nurses and physician assistants who are already enabled to pronounce death to also do that even if the patient was an organ donor.
No questions.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Ms. Stovall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Rules Committee. I come before you requesting for HB 614, the Landon Dunston Act. It's under modified open rule in the 8th from the top. And what this bill does, it allows the Department of Education to authorize or approve video cameras in the classrooms of our special needs students. It is optional, it is not mandatory, and we did not, on the Department of Education, didn't have any problems with the legislation.
No questions.
Thank you.
Ms. Beskin.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I have two bills today. I again bring you House Bill 959, which is on page 3 under modified structure rule. This is the annual cleanup to the Title 20 education bill, and I know we talked about this yesterday, so I'd be happy to answer any questions about that.
No questions.
The second is House Bill 766 on page 3 under structured rule. I initially brought this bill to the committee last week. At that time, it covered only one topic, and that was revising the definition of qualified applicants for homestead exemptions to include any spouse. That was a cleanup. After that committee hearing, another member came to me and asked if I would include a related provision under the same title and chapter regarding veterans benefits. It's a cleanup. Currently, I think last year when we revised the definition of qualified veterans to apply for homestead exemptions, for partially disabled veterans, there were two alternative provisions, but the word "and" was inadvertently used when it should have been "or." So I can read that provision if the committee would be interested, or I can go ahead and just ask for that bill or take any questions.
I think the latter would be best. No questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Bentley.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I bring to you House Bill 860, which is found on modified open rule, the second to the last of the first page. HB 860, which deals with the position of coroners currently in the state of Georgia. Anyone who's ever been convicted of a felon and had their rights restored and received a pardon by the Georgia Parole Board is eligible to run for public office, except for the position of coroner. So this bill is basically making it possible for individuals that may want to seek the position of coroner to be able to do so, only if they have had their rights restored and received a pardon from the parole board.
No questions. Wait a second. Yes, there is. Ms. Pro Tem.
I just had a question. What
Yes,
other
ma'am.
offices are they eligible to run for if they are pardoned by pardons and parole?
House of Representatives, county commissioners, mayors, all those positions they can run for, but not for the position of coroner currently by current law in the state of Georgia. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the author, how do the coroners feel about this bill? Have you checked with the coroners?
Yes, the coroners in the beginning were in favor. I understand now they would like for me to add the position of sheriff to this bill, and I'm not willing to add sheriff to this bill, only the position of coroner.
So they want it dead.
Thank you for the question. I just...
No more questions. No more questions. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Atwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I ask for your favorable consideration of House Bill 851. It's on the first page under Modified Open, fourth from the bottom. Very simple bill. It asks for an annual audit of the records maintained by the Board of Trustees of County Law Libraries. I serve on a board of law libraries, so I'm effectively asking you to audit me if this legislation passes. We're having significant monies build up as a result of law libraries going away from hardbound books in many cases to computer-generated research for the citizens, and that's what they're normally for the citizens of a county, and there's no requirement under law currently to audit those funds. This has the support of the Association of County Commissioners of Georgia as well as the Supreme Court clerks.
I assume that you are running for a different position down there on the coast, right?
Yes, sir, I am.
You don't have to ask for an audit. Somebody's going to audit you, as they do each of us here. No questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee.
Ms. Waits.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the body. I bring to you House Bill 54, which provides tuition grants for the children of fallen heroes in public safety that have been killed in the line of duty. It provides a voluntary checkbox for your tax return as well as your driver's license. I ask for your favorable consideration.
No questions. Thank you. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 831, Protecting Guardsmen Employment Act. This is if individual is pulled away from due to a guardsman requirement, then their jobs are protected.
Are there any questions on it? And for those of you, if you're reading it, it's Mr. Smyre's bill. But he could not be here, and he asked Mr. Smith if he would present that bill. Mr. Harrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, under structured rule, page 3, House Bill 936. This clarifies terms with regard to our job tax credits to make sure that all the jobs, each new job created has to be above the minimum requirement rather than the average number of jobs. That's House Bill 936.
Any questions? Raise your hand since I've got so many lit up here. No questions. Next one.
House Bill 937 extends a sunset provision for sales tax exemption on our projects of regional significance from June 30 of this year to June 30 of 2019. No other changes.
Any questions? Raise your hand. No questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
The minority leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask for HB 542, the Higher Education Savings Plan, and HB 860, the Dead Coroners Bill.
Mr. Earhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to put my name beside my young colleague from Cobb's bill, Representative Rees, House Bill 874. He's very earnest about that particular piece of legislation. So.
Ms. Dempsey.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to put my name beside HB 763, Chairman Houston's bill.
Mr. Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask for a couple of bills this morning. House Bill 948. This deals with interstate compact that Georgia's a member of with the other 50 states. We transfer inmates that are on parole or probation from Georgia back to their native states, and those in native states that are here in Georgia incarcerated, and they can be transferred back and forth. There's currently a $25 fee for that to help offset the transport cost if they have been detainers that's been put on them. That program is taking a severe cost over the years, has not been raised, and the department is asking for a raise from from $25 to $100 as an application fee for the non-indigent applicants that wish to be transferred to out-of-state prisons or those transferred back to Georgia prisons.
Mr. T. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to put my name by Chairman Jasper's bill, HB 859, and Representative Brockway bill, HB 792.
What was the last one?
792, Representative Brockway's bill.
Mr. Rice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Under modified structure, fourth one down the second page, House Bill 205. House Bill 205 provides another option for offenders in a DUI situation to have an interlock ignition device installed on their car. And this is supported by MAD and has gone through about 4 years of study and preparation.
Ms. Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask for House Bill 900. This would allow us to use our PDM, our prescription monitoring program, more effectively. It would allow dentists and doctors to delegate to a licensed person in their business the ability to access the PDM. They would still be under the $100,000 fine in the law, and they could lose their license if they misuse the information. It would allow a pharmacist to let another pharmacist know that somebody was shopping pharmacy to pharmacy, or a doctor to let another doctor know. And it would clear up things like keeping the data for 2 years and subpoena powers. Now, if somebody wants to get a subpoena, they have to come to Atlanta. It would allow them to get the subpoena in the area at which, the misuse or abuse is occurring. Thank you.
Mr. Willard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's two items I have with propositions this morning. The first is going to be the constitutional resolution, which is 1113. It's listed under structured, modified structured. And this is the provision that is to change the means by which there is created a Judicial Qualification Commission in Georgia. It is putting back into the General Assembly, as we have with most everything otherwise, created oversight by the General Assembly as to the manner by which the Judicial Qualification Commission would operate and make determinations. It also recognizes the advisory opinions given by the Judicial Qualification Commission are subject to the Supreme Court review, which is being a battle right now, ways between that body and the state Supreme Court. And this would become effective only, of course, upon the voters of the state approving it. The other item is the House bill that is a companion bill, House Bill 808, also under structured matters. And this is the bill that will set up the form of governance of the Judicial Qualification Commission. It is putting the appointment of several of the members back into the House, the Senate, and the governor, 3 members that were previously being appointed by a non-governmental body, the State Bar of Georgia. And I think part of the problem we've had is some of the people appointed through the bar have not conducted themselves appropriately, and we are asking for the bill to be approved. It will also recognize that their meetings, which are, let's say, now closed meetings, will be open meetings as far as normal business matters. They have all their meetings closed. There's not knowledge of the public of how they're transacting their business. Certainly they can still have the executive sessions when necessary for the matter of reviewing conduct by a judge, but we feel that their at least business meetings should always be open. So we have both of these propositions, and I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Willard, can you talk a little bit about the interplay between the study committee and the JQC constitutional amendment?
Thank you. Good question, Minority Leader. I spoke the other day from the podium over here that we have a study committee provision also as a resolution, and I spoke of that as being something to go forward. The problem is we're running out of time, and speaking with the leadership of the House, we are suggesting that these two matters go forward. Monday I will address again the study committee and seek approval from the committee to have that go forward. But in the essence of time, in order to maintain the viability of the bill as well as the resolution, we are asking those to be considered by the House first. But there will still be a study committee resolution hopefully coming to the body for approval.
Thank you.
The purpose of the study committee, just one last thing, Mr. Chairman, is to really give information that is important for not only this body, but also the people of Georgia to see what are the deficiencies and how this particular commission is operating. And if they find that to be warranting a need, they can make the change by the constitutional resolution.
Mr. Weldon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Under modified open, House Bill 605, first I'd like to ask that, or make a motion that be moved to structured rule. And the reason for that is this is a retirement bill that affects the Judicial Retirement Fund. And what the bill does is it gives a formula for calculating part-time judges that later move into full-time. An example would be a magistrate judge or a state court judge that's a part-time judge, and then later they move into being a superior court judge or a full-time state court judge. This just gives them the ability only in the judicial retirement system to do that. I appreciate your favorable consideration.
Mr. Setzler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask for HB 874, Representative Reeves' criminal gang bill. It's been through a lot of scrutiny in the Non-Civil Judiciary Committee and something that a lot of our communities need. Also would ask HB 93, Representative Pizzo, good privacy bill.
Mr. Benton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask for House Bill 923, which is in structured rule. That would allow for tax exemption on purchases done by fire district, which is the only one created by the legislature. I also like to put my name beside House Bill 768.
Mr. Golick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Under modified structured House Bill 941, this has to do with the grand jury process and specifically the area where a police officer is accused of potential criminal activity. Under current law, in front of a criminal grand jury, the police officer has a right to go ahead and appear in front of that grand jury. However, they are also allowed to stay in the grand jury room and hear and see the entire time all of the evidence and testimony that is presented by other witnesses. They can then come at the very end of the grand jury proceeding and offer a statement of whatever they want to say and are not subject to cross-examination. Obviously, what this presents is the possibility, the potential that that particular witness, which happens to be a law enforcement officer, can hear and see everything and potentially tailor their testimony according to what they have seen and what they have heard. That provides the potential for a manipulation of the grand jury process. The bill that came out of committee, House Bill 941, will narrow that privilege. The compromise middle ground that the committee struck was the officer will retain the right and should have the right to tell his side of the story in a criminal situation, especially where there's a discharge of his or her weapon and a fatality and a serious injury occurs. However, if they're going to exercise that right to appear in front of the grand jury, then they're going to go ahead and be subject to cross-examination as any other witness would. And that's the middle ground that we struck. The bill also provides for increased transparency, a written record, so the officer and the public at large of a particular jurisdiction knows the decisions that were made, the evidence that was presented, and has a real connecting of the dots as to what happened, who said what, and then they can make their own judgments about it in the future. You would think, final point, Mr. Chairman, you would think that by virtue of narrowing this privilege, one thing that's important, our approach that allows the officer to be in there the entire time, hear and see everything, and then not be subject to cross-examination. We're the only state in the country that has that particular approach. You would think that law enforcement in general would be against the narrowing of that privilege. But to their credit, the law enforcement organizations of the state have recognized that a change is necessary. And as a result, I think, of the balanced, measured approach that we're taking in this bill, the bill is endorsed by the Georgia Sheriff's Association, the Fraternal Order of Police, the GBI on behalf of the administration, and the Georgia Association of Police Chiefs. And I appreciate the time and the indulgence, but I thought that detailed explanation was important. Thank you.
I thought it was Mr. Willard explaining something.
Yeah. There's a remarkable resemblance.
Mr. Green.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to put my name beside House Bill 773. That's Chairman Houston's bill.
Ms. Sims.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to place my name by House Resolution 979. That is Chairman Houston's bill on study for the programs that provide services for the blind.
Ms. Hughley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to put my name beside House Bill 6 of Representative Kendrick and House Bill 910 of Representative Fry.
Okay, this is the calendar for Monday. You remember that you've got 5 days next week, not the 4. Under modified open, HB 784.
Move. Second.
Any opposed? It's on. Under modified open, HB 831.
Move. Second.
Any opposite? I'm on, I'm just not talking. Again, that was 831. Any opposed? It's on. Under modified open, HB 910. Any opposition? It's on. Under modified open, HB 965.
Move.
Any opposition? Under modified structure, HB 808. Any opposition? It's on. Get ready. Under modified structure, HB 859. Any opposition? All those in favor of 859, raise your hand. All those opposed? It's on.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I'd like to move pursuant to Rule 33.3 that we move to limit debate to 1 hour on HB 859 as allocated by the Speaker.
All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Modified structure, HB 903. Any opposition? Modified structure, HB 904. Any opposition? It's on. modified structure, H.R. 1113. Any opposition? It's under structure, HB 763. Any opposition? That's it.